there we go. November 13th, Water Development Committee meeting. All right, everyone, thanks for joining this evening. We've got some data, which is why we're having the meeting tonight. Kind of important. It's really exciting to start getting some of this data to come in. We've been waiting on the gamma logs for a while. And then we did ask, Stockwell had presented a memo on November 5th with the data log. And then there were some additional questions that I had based on the results that I just kind of sent a quick to make sure that we had the information, and Tammy did ask for some additional information, so there's an added memo that is new tonight that we have not had a chance to review, so we can review that together. The goal tonight is really to understand the gamma log and to hopefully come up with a suggestion on which direction to head, and move forward from there. So, am I getting feedback?
Yeah, it's holding.
Sorry.
Yeah, see if it works.
What's this thing? Talks to that thing? We'll make it work. So, but really just kind of wanted to go through the items on the memos first and kind of break it down into, the three options so that we can kind of start talking about those options. So that's where I want to start, is actually on page 2. There's the design alternatives, and everything really kind of revolves around these three alternatives. Now, that's not saying that we couldn't come up with a different alternative and come up with some other ideas and brainstorm. That's kind of the awesome thing about what this group has done in the past, is had good brainstorming, good communication. Raleigh and I were just chatting in the back a little bit about some other brainstorming ideas, and that's what makes this group work really well, is because we're not afraid to do that. So please don't feel that it's just these three alternatives, but these are the three that were presented by Stockwell specific to well 8. So alternative number 1 is to do a shortened well screen and really try to reduce the radiologicals. So when we kind of talked about it in the past, the radiologicals are really from that quartzite wash, and this is all fresh in my brain because I had the opportunity to talk to Patty Hammond last evening, so it was really good to hear from her again. Her recovery's gone well, but still energy is a little low to come to these kind of things. So she kind of gave me some feedback, and so that's one of the options, is basically to bring that bottom up, so we're not going as deep as we possibly can. That does have some side effects with it, where we're going to potentially lose capacity. The second option is to do a full well screen to maximize the yield. So that's literally, we're going to screen it from 200 to 280, and the purpose of option 2 is to get as much water as possible. That comes at the risk of potentially higher contaminants. So when you look at the trade-offs. The third option is to go with the full screen, and when you do that, you're going to come back and block portions of it off. So in this case, you'd screen the whole thing, and then you'd basically install a plug, if you will, in certain areas to try and remove that portion of the screen. The biggest side effect there is the cost. So I want to thank Tammy for taking the effort. I know she had a lot of other things going on today, but on page 3, there's some bold font that kind of will help everyone understand the potential cost impacts of each project or each option. So it looks very similar to page 2, but it has that added piece of the cost. So design alternative 1, which is the shorter screen, is going to be the cheapest cost at $216,825. What does that mean, Tammy? Because the well is actually $1 million, right? So
right, that would be the pump house and everything. This
yep.
is just
The
put the screen in, put the motor in.
Okay, so baseline of the about $1 million, that would include, are we just looking at the upgrade cost? Is that kind of the best way to look at this?
So is this kind of like below ground cost, like underground cost, pipe and the screening?
This is just to get us to that 32-hour testing.
Okay, so these prices only get us a 32-hour run test. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? That was kind of a question I had, so.
And that's alternative 1,
or any of these,
Any of them.
this is
Okay.
what it would cost to get to that baseline of the 32-hour run test. So option 2 is a little bit more at 230,000. Obviously, you're going deeper in the ground, so you've got more screen. But again, that comes at the cost of additional funding plus the potential risk of additional contaminants. The positive with that one is you're going to get more production. You've got more screen, you can suck in more water potentially. So
And that's probably also the baseline of the original cost estimate was to go down to the bottom of the formation, so. that's-
as I understood the earlier dialogue, yes, it was go as deep as possible to get as much yield as possible. So that would probably be correct. That's where number 2 was really the original. That's where we're going to go.
Wouldn't number 3 technically cost the same as number 2 unless we decide to block it off?
That's a good point, and that was something that was kind of I was struggling with is why is that inflated so much? Is it there's obviously going to be some rework based on the testing, and they're just building a budget in there for that.
Right, so you'd have to pull the whole motor and everything out, and then block part of it out, and then put that whole motor back in.
And that's saying that if we did,
If you
so
look at
number 2,
yeah.
it's where it starts for number 3.
Right.
If we then wanna block it, that's the extra cost that you built in.
The
Okay,
extra
got
50
it.
grand.
For only one time?
One time.
Okay.
Would be number 2.
You pull it out, you're plugging it, and you're putting it back in
You
this,
put it back in,
one
and you
time.
have to do that 32-hour test again.
okay,
You s-
and that's
you start
all
the
in
whole
the
process.
281,
Mhm.
got it.
So one of the things that's challenging on this decision is there's no clean way to say what the impacts of the flow rates are. So that's something that Stockwell didn't really put in this because honestly I don't know how they would. Without doing pump testing, it would be very difficult for them to say if you do option 1 you're getting 1,000, if you do option 2 you're getting 1,500 or whatever it is. That information doesn't truly exist unless you go the whole way. So that's one piece of risk that we as a group don't know that picture fully. So that's the 3 options in the cost. So from there, what I want to do is everyone understands those options. Is that correct? Any questions on those options? So then let's look at the data. So now that we know that those are.
Before we go on,
Yep.
so is this for any type of well that we decide to do? Because I know when we initially talked about well 8 and doing it, we talked about, what's that called, a Randy well? Randy well? So if we did, I mean, is this just for the testing purposes? Or if we decide to do a different type of, would there be additional, do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it very well, but.
Yeah, this is just to basically put the hole in the ground, put the casing pipe in the ground, pump test it to size the well and the motor, and then the rest of the $1 million would be above ground with the control system.
Okay, so if we did just a straight well
The-
opposed to the Randy well,
We talked about the Randy well in the
Uh-huh.
Big Sioux aquifer, cause it's shallower, but it
Okay.
doesn't have the production.
okay.
So a Randy well is just a big case on sunk in the ground with lateral
Mhm.
lines run out to it. And that was, we were talking about that, we were talking 2 to 3 million for that.
Okay. But would we still need to do this if we did a well like that? Yes, okay,
That's, well number 9 is in the Big Sioux,
yeah,
so conceivably we could look at some type of a Randy or collector well there.
okay. Okay.
Good?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. That's a good question, very good question. So realistically, when we talked the last time at the meeting, I think that the biggest thing we talked about was the progressive steps. So we're, moving forward with the gamma log, and then once that's done, now we're moving forward with the next milestone would be the 32-hour pump test. And that's what this gets us. And then once that's complete, then moving forward. So one of the things that, talking to Patty Hammond and Dick Hammond last evening, that they had mentioned was when we did the gamma log of this well, there was already, and I talked to Raleigh, a plastic casing in our test well. That's there. So that does impact the gamma log. So it's like a filter, if you will. So it's going to make that gamma log show smaller than what the true results are. It's going to filter it down. It also makes it so you can't do a resistivity test, which I don't know if anybody remembers the gamma logs when we had that lesson, but there was more than one line on that, and you could tell different things from those different lines. On this gamma log, we only have the one line, and that's the gamma. And we don't have the resistivity. So that is something that, you know, to think about as we're looking at these results, that both Dick Hammond, who's been in this industry forever, the way it seems, and Patty Hammond, who's very knowledgeable, they both suggested that we potentially look at doing another test once we pump, and before we put the casing in to this level, right before we do that, we do another gamma log resistivity, and we add that to the scope. So that way we don't have any filters, if you will, of that plastic pipe in the way. So that's something that Tammy and I haven't had a chance to talk about because she's been tied in a meeting and I'm getting great looks from her. But it's something that we would get a clearer picture on what it is. Now, obviously we have data and it's pretty obvious where the radium is based on the fact that it goes past the chart like 4 or 5 times because it peaks so much. But there's other pieces to this puzzle that we don't have line of sight to, just because the way the test was done and the timing of the test. So typically that test, according to Patty and Dick, would be before you case it, you do the test and then you case it. So just with the way this timed out with well 8 and what we've done, the casing was already there. We couldn't undo that. So does that make sense to everyone?
So you would do another test with the casing still there though, so what do you change?
So actually what you do is when they go to drill well 8, the actual well that we're talking about in this $200-ish thousand, they go about 10 to 15 feet away and they punch a new hole.
Oh.
So that plastic will stay there forever. It'll just be there, they'll cap it off. And then as they're drilling that new hole, once that's drilled, before they sleeve it,
Oh, I get
they
what you're
run
saying.
the log down again. So I don't know if we think there's value to that. That was just,
I want your opinion, Tammy.
it was just something that Dick and Patty both brought up to me last night when I had a chance to talk to them, finding out that they couldn't be here, so.
What would be the pros and cons of that, I mean,
It's gonna give us a very, very clear picture of what the gamma log looks like without having that potential filtration of the plastic pipe. It's also gonna give us the resistivity, which will help us understand where the hot spots are, and it'll help us understand where the flow characteristics will be, is the way I understand
so
it.
would
But
it cost to do that, and what it would possibly save us with the information we have, do you have any idea?
So I can't remember, was it about $7,000-ish for the gamma log, is that correct? 5,000 is what we spent on this one. And
How much
basically,
time?
that's the other piece of it. In this case, it took a while. I don't know if the hesitation was Stockwell or the loggers or whoever it was, but
It took about 3 months.
so, you know, in this case, they'd be doing it right when they drilled the well, so I don't know if it would be any shorter or not, but it'd be a question we would wanna ask
Test results take a little while, that's part of the problem.
from the gamma log.
Yeah, for.
From the
like,
collection.
To figure out the radial levels and stuff, to actually spot you a level, that's gonna take a while.
Yeah, so,
I need engineer input.
So you're talking about moving the well 10, 15 feet from where?
what Patty
or are we
explained to
just
me
finding
is
out
that,
it's testable?
so what Patty explained to me and Dick explained to me was that typically they don't just drill right through your plastic pipe. They
Right.
just move a few feet away and then
That's
drill
what I'm saying,
again.
yeah.
And that's where your permanent well would be.
Right.
I guess I don't know how much we spent on drilling.
And that, the way they explain it is that's typically how you do it. You put a 2-inch pipe in there because it's super cheap. And then you can't just pull that out and make the hole bigger. You just drill a new well. And it's usually within 15 feet.
I remember
So I don't-
he talked about that.
You know, so it's, and the reason you do that is because you're close enough that nothing's different. Geologically speaking, I think is the term. So, but I don't know. That was just something that was brought up to me is since this information is somewhat skewed, I mean, it's still obvious to see the picture, but it's like you're looking through foggy glasses is the way that it was explained to me. So, I don't know if that's,
And
Tammy?
it's still not going to be exact science.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
We're gonna have to do the test,
Yep.
so.
So it's something that, I don't know if that is something we should put in the scope of this, but Patty asked me to explain that to everybody because the gamma log does only have the one line And some of the hot spots might not be quite as prevalent on this because of the casing already in place.
So are you, Tammy, you're saying it has to be done anyway, no matter what we have to spend on, I mean, do we have a choice, yes or no?
The drilling of the new well has to be done. I
Right.
mean, this is just a test hole. They need to actually drill the production well, and so the question is, do we wanna gamma log that production well before we actually put the well in to get a verification of the gamma?
So it's
log?
kinda
Yep.
like starting over.
It's, the.
Is
really,
there
I think
merit
the
to it? Does
problem
it
is,
help?
how long is it gonna take to
We would get there.
know what the results of that gamma log are? How much delay is there between drilling that
Right.
hole for the production well and actually putting the production well in? I
I
mean,
don't think we have the
are you
time.
drilling it, taking the gamma log and then putting the production well in, so it's all done, and all you're doing is verifying the gamma log, or are you gonna wait and look at the gamma log before you make your decision about what to do with the production log?
Right.
Because I think there's a time delay on the whole process if you wanna get a gamma log before actually installing that production log.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't sure how long it's gonna take. I mean, it takes time, I understand, but was there a month or
Well, you said this one took 3 months, right?
did it take 3 months?
About 3
Yeah,
months.
basically 3 months, so, you know, and I don't think we really wanna wait the 3 months, so that's a pretty big risk for us to further delay, so, but
And I
when
think
you,
one
when
of
you
the-
see the bumps in the road, I guess, kinda what Patty explained to me was, when you see the bumps in the road, it's a bigger bump than shows on the picture, because of the casing.
Well, that's good news, right?
No.
No.
Bump is the radiological, not the
Right.
water. Okay.
Well,
Yep.
the bumps are, it's not like they're just little bumps, you know, it's not
Right.
like they're just like that, I mean, the
Right.
bumps are big
Right.
bumps.
You
So
know
if
where
they're
they're
just gonna
at.
be more,
Right.
you still know where the bumps
they're
are
at.
at.
So
Right.
the deeper you go, the worse it is.
Correct.
Yeah, which is
We
obvious.
pretty much knew, so,
Yeah.
And I think this supports what we saw from well 7. is
that's
that
correct.
was
Deeper you
screened
go.
down in this deeper
Mhm.
stuff that had the really high gamma log on it.
Right.
And that's the well with the highest amount of radio, so it's somewhat consistent with another well in the same formation, so.
Right.
It's not surprising that this is the results that it's showing, but, so the purpose of doing another gamma log would be, are any of these smaller bumps actually much bigger bumps that we should be concerned about, where on this graph, they don't look like much compared to the stuff on the bottom, but maybe if you had a full gamma log, well, it would be a much bigger reading, and you would be more concerned about screening a well in that portion of the formation.
And then the other piece is the lithological, if I'm saying that correctly. It's what is the dirt makeup as you go down through the driller's log, that kind of thing. You know, if there's, some of these may be clay veins, the way it was explained to me. And I really wish Patty was feeling up to being here. She can say it so much more elegant than I can, but like right above 208, which is, there's a pretty significant spike there. And then between 229 and 233, there's another bump there. And those two bumps might be related to the makeup of the earth, or it could be the radioactivity. And based on that casing being there, those are clipped down. So if we were to, as a committee, say we don't want to screen anywhere that exceeds the right edge of this graph, just as a, for instance, if you were to take and run this test again without a casing, you would see more of them exceed that right edge. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So, and then the E-log, which is that resistivity, it can't be done on a cased well, and that was in that last email from John Brown that came in this afternoon, so. So there's a ton of information here, and I know we kind of go back and forth, but, you know, really the nuts and bolts of it are, we need more water. Well 8 is the area that we've investigated the most, and that we have the most data from. You know, it's a risk reward. It's that matrix of what risk are you willing to take for what reward. And when we go back to those options, is there a certain option that screams out to us? And Yeah, so,
How does this well compare to well 6 and its depth and its driller's log for well 8 versus well 6?
Raleigh, do you remember how deep well 6 is? I was,
They're fairly similar.
At 280?
Yeah,
Okay.
280, right around there, 290, I think, but,
mhm.
How big's the screen in 6?
Smaller.
the screen is a little smaller in 6, and it's not set directly at the bottom, I don't believe. I wanna say it's 20 feet up.
So, I guess one of the things that I was talking with Raleigh before we kinda got going was, if we choose to reduce the amount of screened casing, that's going to reduce the amount of production we get out of the well. And that's going to trigger us to have to start thinking about other things. And one of those other things that we've talked about as a committee in the past is doing a similar investigation to what we did here over at the well 7 site and see if there's a potential for us to shorten up that screen as well, because we've already got all the infrastructure there basically. We just need a short piece of pipe from wherever the new house is to there. And some of that, I guess, I don't know when we're overstepping the bounds of what's happening in the AE2S study. So that's where I guess I get a little concerned, but if we're reducing the potential production from well 8, we need to understand that, we need to be able to communicate that, and we need to be prepared for that. So that's kind of why I'm bringing that up, is instead of being a huge production well that we were gonna get 1,500 gallons a minute or better, now all of a sudden, it might only be 1,000. And that's a pretty significant deal. But it also, if it's better quality water, we have to do less blending and less treating, and in the end, that saves us money because the chemicals to treat it are somewhat expensive.
And it might fit better into our long range plan. It might not be as good short term because really we're looking at well number 8 as a replacement for well number 6. We're not decommissioning well 6, but we'd like well 8 to be the
Right, we still
replacement.
have
So if we
6.
put in something at a lower capacity, it's not a replacement because we wouldn't be getting the same capacity as our primary producing well. But long term, once you add in other sources, it might work better because we would screen it shorter because we would expect it to have a lower radium content.
Right, and I know
Also,
we've,
we'd be able to blend it better. You know, we could use it to blend with other water that we have coming in to gain the capacity because it's better quality water.
and one thing we haven't talked about as a committee yet, and this really isn't necessarily on the agenda for tonight, but something that in the future we should probably talk about is if this is going to have lower production potentially and we need additional water sources, Raleigh hit the nail on the head. We've got well 3, which is a pretty darn decent producer for us, and if we could get that to the treatment plant, that might have some pretty good opportunity for us because of the blending and the quality of that water. So, you know, as we're looking at overall shuffling, and Tammy's gonna be helping with this too, is, you know, where do we aim the money at? And some of that again is AE2S studies, so, you know, let's not overstep our bounds, but as we reduce quantity, we've gotta be looking at it from somewhere else.
Well, and as we've spoken in the past, the Big Sioux, we're still looking for a shallow well in the Big Sioux. I mean, we know we're gonna need other sources.
That's what the
I mean,
AE2S study's for.
Right, so, I mean, we know that there will be a recommendation for other sources coming in that study, it's just a matter of how many and where they're at. So I think we, you know, take that into consideration, we're making a decision that we know we're gonna need other sources.
Yep.
That's something that's coming regardless of what we do here, we're going to need other sources.
Right.
Yep.
So rather
So-
than speculate, let's pick our thing or talk about, just stop thinking about that it won't produce. Let's just think, hey, it's gonna produce, and then we're there. I mean, cause this is the only thing we can talk about today, right?
Cause that's all we know.
Right.
Right. Exactly. So, based on the information that I've seen and looked at and had the opportunity to review and talk with some of the Dick Hammond and Patty Hammond, those two as experts. I call them experts, I guess. I think they're pretty darn knowledgeable. So they definitely were leaning towards shortening it up, so don't go to 280. the words that Pat Hammond used was, that's not a rock I would want in my pocket, based on the gamma log. So don't take and put that, you know, in your pocket, cause it is gonna be the biggest potential risk. So shortening it up to 260 to them made the most sense.
Rather than doing number 3.
Right. Because you already know that area is bad, so why bother spending extra money? Why go deep? That was kind of their input.
That
And
was
his,
my initial thought too, is why even go deep when we know even on the reduced log that we have, that the levels are high after 266 or whatever, so why would we even
and his,
dig deeper and then just screen it, I mean, just to screen it off at a later time? It doesn't seem to make sense to spend that money.
right, and the other part of it too is historically, if you look at some of the testing that we've done with the other wells that are deep, the harder you pump them, then we start to see some of that radium sucking up from that depth too. So, I mean, when we kind of look at that, I mean, it's gonna stratify, right? I mean, and you're gonna get some water from that area, but you're sucking it through the nasty part of it. So that's one of the pieces that not having, we don't know if there's any kind of, I forget what they called it, but basically a layer in between that, right at 260, that basically would be a trap for that water to not come through. I don't understand all of that, I guess, but sometimes there'll be shale or something like that that'll basically be, and then it can't penetrate through. So, but I guess I would rather see us shorten it up. I don't know what everyone else's thoughts are. There's a lot of brains here that honestly, we've been so educated, it's amazing. You can put a group like this together and we know what a gamma log is. I think that was the email I got from Amanda was, oh my gosh, can you believe it? We have a gamma log and we truly know what that means. Sorry, sorry, I can't be at the meeting. So, and the other part of this is we're spending $200,000-ish to get us to the next step, and that's to do the water quality testing at the 32-hour pump. So if something goes haywire at that point and we've got something that we feel is untreatable, then we can pick up, move, figure out a different plan, I would assume. I don't want to throw away $200,000, but
And does it go from 216,825, it goes up to 232,000, and what's option 3 cost?
281. It's on page 3. If you,
The
you're-
cost.
It's on page 3.
the new handout that we got tonight.
Oh, I don't have the.
There it is.
now.
There you go.
Got it.
Perfect. Yep. And that was Tammy's idea, so I'm super excited that you did that. That helps a lot to understand the cost. Thanks, Tammy, for doing that. So, Tammy, you've been quiet.
One thing about going deeper is then we would have the water quantity that we need. And we do have the HMO system in our water treatment plant, plus we're gonna have the IMR. So that should be able to take care of most of that. So I guess it's more of how much risk you wanna take. You wanna say absolutely no radium? Or are we saying that some would be acceptable? Or
If you look at what people in the community say, none.
none? Right.
They're always like yelling at us, no.
Not everyone.
I think if we have a well with a lower radium production, it just opens up more potential for being able to blend without and lowering the ultimate amount of treatment that's needed, how much you have to use the HMO to get to the dosage or the correct
Levels.
contaminant level that you're trying to target. I just think that if we go all the way to the bottom, we know we're gonna be picking up the highest concentration of the radium. I mean, it's supported in well number 7, that's probably where a lot of well number 6 is coming from, but the amount that it has, so. We're gonna get less capacity by going shorter, but I think we're also gonna get a better water quality to start with, so that we have to do less treatment, opens up the amount of our blending options, you know, maybe you get most of the way there just by blending with number 3, as opposed to risking going all the way to the bottom. You're getting more quantity, but you're also, that quantity has a higher concentration of iridium is higher, is harder to blend, so. But it's not going to be a replacement for well 6. I mean, you're going to have well 6 online for when you hit your peaks, because well number 8 probably isn't gonna meet it.
Well, and also, let me think back to, or ask Raleigh about last summer now. We had well 3 going. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've heard, well number 3 was producing better than anyone thought.
It produces about 1 million gallons a day.
And we did-
900,000, I think we figured it out.
But we weren't really thinking it would do that well, right? I'm just thinking, you know, well 3 would also be an option that.
It'll do that, it's just that
It doesn't go to the
Like the
treatment
time.
plant.
it hasn't been used a lot, and part of the reason is because it doesn't go through the plant. So there's more iron and manganese in that.
Okay, okay.
So it's pretty much unfiltered, you know, it's the treatment that we use now at the treatment plant isn't on that line. So
Okay.
And that'll cost about $1 million to get it to the treatment plant.
Right.
And it's also an old well, right? I mean, that well number 3 is one of the older wells every time. Not sure if it's
So we don't want
older
to
or
use
newer than
that
6.
as an option.
Not right now.
Water source.
So.
We're just talking about this right now, right?
Yep.
Can I ask a question? Can somebody put it in perspective, like the capacity, so if it got shut down at 260 versus 275 versus 300, what are the different capacities?
There really isn't a way to
Don't
do
know.
that.
So if it's
It's,
full bore, what are we expecting? With
Don't
300,
know.
we're expecting what kind of production?
ideally, I think they based that on if they went the full depth, they were looking at 15 to 1600 gallons.
and shortening up that screen, there's no clean way to say you're losing 10% or 20%. I wish there was. But, and that's,
More like 1,000.
So if you went up to
Went up to
260.
lose about 500 gallons.
But if it's cleaner water and the well 7 water is already at the plant and we have the medium in place to treat it, if we blended it, we would be able to get the additional 600,000 gallons from well 7 if we blended it and treated it. Possibly.
Maybe use well 7.
Well, possibly. I mean, it's there, it's treatable if we do the test and it all comes out after being blended and treated that it's within the levels, we could use it, correct?
Question, could it?
um,
Willing to take the risk.
right.
6 and 8 cannot be used at the same time though, right?
So that's
Okay.
one thing I guess, Raleigh and I talked a little bit about back there too, but, so 6 and 8 we're not using at the same time. And that's something that's been told to us over and over and over again. But Dick and Patty both asked why not. Because they've seen wells closer together than those two that were allowed to do it. Yes, there's gonna be some drawdown and some concerns there, but, could you potentially be running both of those wells at a lower percentage? What is the state's actual answer, not Stockwell's answer, but the state's answer? And then the other question is could we scoot well 8 a certain place away? And Raleigh and I talked that in Aspen Park, the further we go, the more chance there is for other things to deal with. So, but we're kind of in this pickle where we only have so much land and so few places to put it. So, and our water rights are only for certain areas. So, is well 8 in the right spot? Is there a potential that if we moved it 1,000 feet, would that get us far enough away where we could use 6 and 8 both? I don't know that answer. So that's something that I guess we would need to understand. But if there was a potential there, I would love to hear what that is. I mean, how far is it have to be away, I guess is the simple question. And is that geologically close enough that we have valuable data or not? Tammy?
I haven't had those conversations with the state, so
And
I don't think there's a quick answer to that.
I think it's due to the production of what your well is, and if you're trying to put 2 wells in the same aquifer, at the same similar area, and to run them both at the same time, and that's where the state has ground on it and said you should look outside of a certain
that's kind of what was coming to my head was about that distance. The only thing that I was wondering is we know we can't produce 1,500 gallons a minute out of both wells at the same time. But if we're losing, let's say it's 1,000, we can only produce 1,000 out of well 8. Would the state allow us to supplement out of 6, 500? Now again, you're losing some of your redundancy, but for peak shaving, would they allow us to run both at the same time for that reason or not? I don't know, and that's why I'm bringing it up. You know, it's a question that could be asked, and if they would, that'd be great, because then we could, you know, potentially meet our demands. You know, I don't necessarily want to be sucking 2 straws out of the same aquifer at the same time, because that comes with all kinds of headaches. But is anyone leaning to a specific? I've heard a couple dialogues towards just cut it short, because we know that the risk is really high if we go full depth. Is that kind of the consensus of the group? We could set a
I think we
record.
have to decide, don't we, what's more, what is the most need and cost effective for the city, right?
I mean, quantity versus quality.
Right, I mean, you're gonna have to make that decision, really, to me.
Well, that's where 3 is the best of both worlds, but it costs the most.
Well, 3 doesn't have the same quantity of water either. It's a good blend, you can get it.
Sorry, I meant number 3 as the choice, not the well. Yep, sorry. Design alternative number 3 is the best of both worlds, because then you can go back in and put it back up to the 60 if it's bad, but you get the most yield.
But if we put it back up to the 60, then you're reducing your quantity again.
Right, but at least I mean, I know 50,000 is a lot of money, but in the scheme of what we're looking at, if we can get good water from 2 to 280, why wouldn't we try it? If we can't, then we move it back up. I mean, I think that's my argument for that one. I could go with number 1 as well.
Number 3 is gonna take you more time to.
Okay, time is
Because
bad.
What's gonna happen is they'll drill it to the 280, they'll test it. It's gonna take you X amount of time to get that result back. Not good, so you're gonna fill it so far. Now they're gonna run it again and test it again, so now you got more time stacked on top of it. You're gonna double your time.
Oh, so with number 1, they're only drilling to the 260.
Right.
Oh, I get it. Sorry. I was thinking we were going down as far as the tube already is, and then, okay, got it.
So if something got approved in the next 2 or 3 months, we'd be still looking at fall before we would be
Well, no,
getting that running.
this will be online before summer, right?
I think they were looking at trying to bid it yet this winter or early after the first part of the year, so we can get it started, because they can do the test wells even in the, I guess if it's not too bad a winter out, they could probably
Oh,
still
really?
pump it during that, but.
Okay.
So we're looking at bidding that into weeds, this portion of it, but to
This
actually,
part, yeah.
then we'll have to have another bidding to actually build it.
To actually do
So
the
I don't know how
building
long it
of
takes
the.
to do the construction now.
And with the construction, don't forget we've got the pipe that goes between the well and the plant, and
Yep.
we're duplicating that leg between that 7 and 6 now have, so there's some work there to be done.
And 6 has to have some extra stuff done to it too, so.
Right. And that's all gonna be in that scope, so. My gut tells me to keep it short and avoid the hot spot.
We've
And
been
then-
talking for a long time about quality. And you brought up untreatable, and I would really like to know what that means, because if we're taking tests of this water, and it tells us what we have for radium levels, 8, 10 picocuries per liter, 12, 15, 20, what does that IMAR treat it to? We've been told 90% removal. We keep going back to this quality discussion, we've been doing it for a long time. So what is untreatable? Why would we wanna pick up and retest to get some number that somebody's gonna have to make a decision whether it's untreatable or not? Is that gonna be us again?
Well, that's the other part of it. At what point is this above our pay grade? That's the only way I know how to say it.
I
And
just
should
think
this
I
information,
think Tammy brings up a great point. We have spent so much money on this HMO process. We're replacing the treatment filter, right?
The median.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this than just, and no offense, Tim, but just a gut feeling to raise a well to reduce our quantity, because we don't know what the quality is right now. We have no idea what that, I mean, to me, I think the Gamelot's great. I know that they're professionals that are gonna read it and look into that, but I think there are so many questions that we're making a decision on that we don't really have answers to still. We keep going in this circle of quality. What are the people of Brandon willing to accept? In my opinion, we're making a decision based on information that we don't necessarily have, which really goes back to what the city of Brandon is going to be. To me, it's a political answer right now. If we just go with one to raise it, to me, it's more to justify reducing quality to get a higher quantity when we could potentially treat what is actually there.
Are you saying then that, which option are you thinking?
Without having real numbers on what kind of radiological, what kind of radium is there, I'd go full depth.
Okay.
We can treat it, we have the HMO process, we're putting in the IMAR, I mean, but it's political.
It's gonna take longer, I mean, does that make it that much different?
Well, what's our schedule?
We don't really have.
Number 2 isn't gonna take much longer than number 1, right?
One and
just
two.
It's
going
really,
down.
it's, to me, it's not how long it's gonna take, it's are we gonna have a well built and have water running from it, what is that date? I mean, we can say it's gonna take longer, it's gonna take twice as long to do number 3, but really when it comes down to it, when is that well gonna be up and running? And we have water pumping to the treatment plant.
So my question would be if we go shorter and we only get 1,000 gallons, where's the other 500 coming from? Now, Tim mentioned well 6, or we hook up well 3 and we gotta spend $1 million to get it to the plant. We gotta have that water from someplace. So what's that answer?
and that's kinda what I read up is if we're cutting ourselves short, you gotta know, like, that's part of this discussion is if we do go shorter to avoid the area of the graph that is the worst, that it has impacts of quantity, and where do we get that?
I think, my brain is going back to what is the point of why we decided to go with well 8? We decided to do well 8 before the AE2S study because of redundancy. So what's the most important part of our redundancy? Is it quantity or is it quality?
It's quantity.
It's quantity, exactly. So why would we cut ourselves short when we don't even know, like you're saying, just
If it is
check
treated
it.
correctly, if
Yeah.
it's treated well enough.
So if we drill well 8 without more testing, are we gonna get a well 6 or are we gonna get a well 7?
Don't know.
I think is what worries me. If we're gonna say, okay, whatever the quality is, we can treat it, then that's definitely true. The same thing holds true for well number 7, which is already in place and already hooked up. So we've already got that capacity that we could use if we wanted to treat it. So if we drilled well number 8 without verifying what that level is, are we gonna get something similar to well 7, or we expect to get something similar to well 6? So if we get something similar to well 6, we're probably just fine going all the way to, at least down to the depth that well number 6 is, because we can probably pretty safely say those two wells are close enough together, we're gonna get pretty equivalent water qualities. But I think that's what we've gotta ask ourselves is, are we getting another well 7, or are we getting another well 6?
Can't answer it.
And if we can't answer it, then it's probably number 3 tells you what you're getting. But then you go back to Paul's point of, okay, you get that answer, what are you gonna do with the information that it gives you?
I just don't think untreatable exists, in my opinion. It's a political
True.
untreatable, if that's what you wanna, if that's how you wanna look at it, because we don't have numbers on the radiation or the radium. And the cost of a well house and pump is significantly more than just drilling down another, whatever, how many feet we need to get to the bottom of this and start pulling water out. So if we're okay with that, then I just think we've been, I mean, we've talked about all of this and we've gone in circles, and it really comes down to, do we wanna reduce the radium? We can pull it up, we can reduce the quantity.
I guess I come back to what Patrick was saying. Is it gonna be another 6 or another 7? Had the gamma log looked like this on 7, which most likely it did, and you cut that short, we'd already be running 7, and that $1.5 million that we spent on 7 would have been fine. So,
Yeah, if we were to pump well 7 now and treat it.
well, I'm just saying, I mean, when you talk to Sioux Falls, that was one of the things they talked about with that well, is where it was screened was the hottest spot, and you can see that in the radiologicals on 7. The chances are that if you would go, and we talked about 7A or whatever you wanna call it, 100 feet away from 7, the closest we can be, and you pop that in and you cut that screen short, that quality is gonna increase, and treating that to a 1 or whatever value you wanna deem is the safe value, you could do that very easily. And the risk here is we know there's a bad spot, so why in the world would we put it into that spot?
And I think we could have used well 7 and blended it and been just fine, but that was a political thing.
Mhm.
And that blew up, and I think we could have avoided all that, so, there was a plan.
You have a lot of notes in your office. They need your help.
What do you mean by, are we getting a well 7? Like
So,
the amount of radiation?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, if we go all the way to the bottom and screen, you know, to the part where it shows the highest gamma log activity, are we going to get a water quality similar to the water quality that's in well 7?
I'm telling you right now, it does not matter, because the radium levels are going up. And that's the political part, that's what the residents see. It doesn't matter, we could be pumping from well 8, and we're gonna continue to pump from well 8, radium levels are going up. Same with radium levels in well 6, we heard it over and over and over. Why would we use well 6? We know the radium levels are going up, because we're pumping more water out of it. That's all that's what the public says, that's what we hear. Radium levels in 6 could go up to radium levels in 7 if we keep pumping from it. That's how the public sees it,
Well, but
right?
if that's how the public sees it, but that's actually what is happening then, isn't it? I mean, you pump it to an extent where, I mean, it's gotta come from somewhere, it's coming from
Yeah.
down deeper.
And we treat it.
And we treat it.
And if we can, when this earlier planning was going on, was the IMAR thought of that, was that?
Yep, that was an option.
Mm-hmm.
The IMAR things, how long have we been talking about replacing the filter media?
For a while.
Long time.
That, I think that's part of the thing that everybody's missing. The green sand was only supposed to remove 80 to 85%. This IMAR is supposed to remove 90 to 92%, I believe. Plus, we're using the HMO process now, whereas before we were just using potassium permanganate, which was basically designed to remove the iron and the manganese. Nothing to do with the radium.
And when did those two get installed, the HMO and IMAR, when were they put in?
The HMO is already in place, it's been in place for over a year.
Over a year, okay?
Yep, when we did well 7. And
Okay.
the filter media, we're actually gonna be taking bids on that within couple of weeks.
With the completion date of March 15th.
Well, the green sand wasn't actually performing to 80% anymore because of.
Well, it
its-
also has
its
a life,
shelf life.
yeah, it has a life of about 8 to 10 years, and that went 20 years.
Which is why we installed the HMO process.
We're trying to make a decision based on the best information that we have, and the gamma log obviously has some weight to it, based on what you're saying. But I still think you're making a decision, we are potentially making a decision based on information that we don't have, that we're not gonna get, because we don't know the radium levels, and we potentially can treat with the IMAR and the HMO process levels of radium that we've been treating. In well 7, I hate to think that we wasted all that money on that well. And the piping to it.
And I agree, and that was one of the things that Raleigh and I were talking about is would it make sense to put money towards doing investigation of right next well 7 and doing selective screening? Because if you did selective screening on this, and you shortened it up as an example, and you lost production, and you did selective screening on 7, those 2 wells could far exceed the production of 6, potentially.
This goes into E2S's source study. In my eyes,
Exactly.
we're talking about redundancy, and this is what we have to decide right now, because we gotta keep 8 going, because we need the redundancy. No? Do I see it differently than everybody else?
No,
No, I think you're right.
And I-
We've been talking about well 8 for well over a year now, and getting that constructed should have been done a long time ago. And we were gonna construct it without a gamma log.
Well, now we've got the gamma log, so
Yep.
do we go 260 or do we go 280?
We play it safe, and we set the capacity at 1,000, or whatever it is. Can we alternate and use 6 during the summer when we have more demand, and use 8 during the winter when we have less demand?
State just recommends that we do not run both wells at the same time.
And it's an easy switch.
Well, with the control stuff that we're looking at doing with the well 8 building and stuff and the new transmission line to the plant, yes, it'll just be a matter of saying, I'm gonna alternate, turn one on and leave the other one off.
I'm for that option.
What quantity do we need for true redundancy of what we were going for, 1,500 or 1,000?
1,400 or better. The well's running right now roughly about 1,400 to 1,500.
Do we have any ideas as far as what's the growth right now that we're doing per year for increase of growth? 1%.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of some of my fears, that we have some things come in and then all of a sudden it's huge growth and we're not gonna be in trouble.
The only downfall I see to 3 is that it will turn into a political nightmare if it comes back with high radium at 280. And even if we put the screen in, then everyone thinks it's well 7. That's the only problem with doing number 3, in my eyes. Because we already know we can treat it, and and we know we can put the screen back up to 260, at least then we gave it a shot, is my thought process.
I just don't know that it's worth $65,000.
To go up to option 3.
Yeah. Is it really worth $65,000?
Seems like a educated spending of money.
but it's the time delay. Cause you're probably adding 2 months onto that at least. By the time you do the testing, and then if you decide to plug it. 3
For
months.
that long, the test come.
Yeah, it takes a while to get the test back and stuff, and then you set the wells. It's at least 3 months longer to do that option.
If everything went right and we did option, well, just for ease of purposes, option 1, got it done, when are we gonna be online?
About a year.
A year from now.
1 and 2 aren't any different
Yeah.
schedules.
So a year from now or a year and 3 months from now is not that big of a difference. Because it's not during the summertime. If it was getting done in May or getting done in September, that'd be a big deal. So the timing in this situation, to me, is irrelevant.
Could we save any time on that year if we were, if we broke off the piping side of it and we did that as a separate project and we just tried to get some of that done ahead of time? I mean, is there,
The big time is really the building construction when you build a well building. That's when I think it's gonna take like 6 months.
is there prefab options? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be going into that, but that's where my head goes. I've done a lot of prefab buildings, you can get them done in about a month. But, sorry.
Would you change anything about the piping if we had a 1,500 versus 1,000? You don't need to wait to make that decision.
Right.
I have a fundamental issue with making a decision based on a reduction in quantity that we have been asking for and the community has been asking for, and sacrificing that based on radium levels we don't know exist that we could treat below the EPA standard. And spend more money of our taxpayers' money and our residents to potentially have to either build another well or do something to well 7 that can then provide more water. Just doesn't make any sense to me. And I understand the gamma log. I understand why we did it. That we have information that potentially we could use to not have to sink this well all the way to the bottom. But there's no numbers. I mean, John said it in the council meeting, there's no guarantee.
So what information do we need to make a decision? So what I'm hearing is based on the information we have tonight, there's not enough information to make the decision with enough certainty that we're all comfortable with it.
I mean,
So what information are we
we
missing?
could certainly vote on it if you guys wanted to just.
No,
do it.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying what additional information do we need to make this the decision that makes sense?
You asking me?
Anyone. I mean, what information are we missing?
Is
Does
there
it- I-
information that we'll ever have, that we'll ever.
Right, exactly. Is there information that we're missing? Because if going full depth is gonna get us information that helps us to make the decision of you've got quality that's quality and quantity at full depth and that's worth it to go full depth, then hallelujah, let's do that. But
Like you
are we
said,
gonna
it'll
learn
take 3
something
more
along the
months.
way? It only adds 3 months if we get down there and it doesn't work the way we want it to.
And $51,000.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. So, I mean, that's the feel that I'm getting, and I came into this tonight after some of the discussions with Patty and Dick, was that we're working with very limited information. We're also working with very limited skill. None of us are hydrogeologists. None of us are the rock people. When Patty Hammond explains it to me as that's not a rock you want in your pocket, I instantly go to the makes sense. That chart goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth because it spikes so high that I'd prefer not to put that rock in my pocket. Now, there's no quantifiable understanding to we cut the well short 20 feet. We can't quantify what that flow characteristic is. Based on what happened this summer with well 6, we're almost doing better now, right? Production wise, after the things. I mean,
We were a little bit, it's
it's
kinda come back down a little.
yeah. So I mean, we don't know what the production's going to be at the 260. We don't know if it's going to meet it. If it meets it at 260 and that happens, and great. Is there testing we could do to see how? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
To
is
test the radium level?
No, to test the quantity. So is there a way for us to somewhat create a line in the sand where you know, we did the small well that's out there now, the 2-inch well, we did some test pumping, and we came up with this number of 1,500 gallons a minute potential. Well, how do we do that same thing if we only go 260 deep? How do we know what that potential is? Because somehow we came up with 1,500 gallons a minute potential if we go full depth. So how do we find out what the potential is? You know, is it a linear? Is it, holy smokes, you lose a lot fast? I mean, how do we put a number to that? Because I think that's the biggest hiccup here is there a balance between quantity and quality? And we keep going back to both, and I get that. But
I honestly don't think that matters. I think that if you wanna make a decision based on quality, you use the analog. You put it where it needs to be, that reduces our quantity. We have to at some point have more quantity, which potentially is gonna cost us more money as taxpayers, as people that live in Brandon. If the public, general public, is okay with that, and they come back and voice their opinion and say, we're okay with reducing the quantity to increase the quality, and we're okay with paying more money for future wells, then we're making the right decision. If the public comes back and says, this is not a good decision, we should be going for quantity, because we can treat the water regardless of the radium level, then we made the right decision by going all the way down.
And do we know we're gonna get more water if we go all the way down? Is that for sure?
Yes,
do know.
'cause that's what the test was done at.
Okay.
So,
well, we don't know how much more, right? I mean, do we have an understanding?
Yeah, we estimated at the 1,500.
And
so we
then
got
if we
500
cut it
less
short-
gallons per minute, well, you're gonna have to recover that from somewhere eventually, depending on the demand that we put on our system. And I might be simplifying this, but that's what it comes down to, is the general public's perception of the decision that we make is going to be based on money in the end, quality versus quantity, right?
Mhm.
We wanna raise that well and get better quality. In the end, it could potentially cost us more money because we're gonna have to look for more quantity. I am in full support of the gamma log. I think it's good information, and I
Yep.
think those experts have a very valid opinion. It comes down to the acceptance of the public, whether we want to increase the quality by raising that up, which potentially could cost us more money in the future, having to look for more water sources.
And I think generally speaking, anyone that you ask is gonna go for the least amount of money out of your pocket, whatever that's gonna be.
Well, and that's where, if you get better quality water, is there a payback on using less chemicals to treat it? I mean,
Probably, do you think less
Probably
chemicals
not.
in the end is going to equal us drilling and building more wells?
No, right now I'm budgeting $54,000 a year or less for my chemicals.
But what were they before that?
It was still running in the 40s.
So we've increased by 10,000,
Into 15.
right, so that's the
In a year.
difference, not,
In a
we're
year.
not spending $50,000 on HMO and
No,
treatment
not
of the
yet.
water, we're
That's all
spending
chemical.
10,000 more. So, I hate to say that's negligible, but I'm pretty sure it's negligible. We spent more just putting in the treatment system and building well 7 that we're not using right now. I don't think I'm simplifying it.
so at what point
Good
does,
characterization of it.
so,
But I think if quality wasn't an issue, I don't think any of us would be here today. Is the problem. There should be no reason that we're not using well 7 if quality isn't a consideration. Because we should be able to treat well number 7 to within EPA standards right now with, well, especially after the RMR, so. I think that we need to take that into consideration with, and I think that if we screened all the way down, we have the full capacity to treat that within safe drinking standards. It's all about perception, and Trudy said people would probably go with the less cost, but if that was always true, we wouldn't be here because we I've already got well number 7, which already provides our duplication of source and that
And I'm
was
just going by the buzz that's out there right now.
The buzz that was created
Rate increases.
by number 7.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, Trudy. I don't know that anybody is gonna be not willing to spend more money on better water.
Well, I would be willing to spend more, that's no doubt, but I think there are a lot of people out there that.
Well, they're not speaking up. When I don't hear that. I don't hear that people are not willing to spend more money on better water. Cause they're going to, believe me.
I think Paul characterized it really well. I mean, we're making a decision between quality and cost. We wanna go for the higher quality, we're gonna have to spend more money to drill additional sources, or get more sources somewhere.
But is it really higher quality if we can treat it? I think we're couching that incorrectly. It's higher quality coming out of the well.
That's right, that's all I'm saying.
But it's not necessarily higher quality coming out of my faucet,
No.
cause it can be treated.
And
I think we need to change that.
Well, that's
Yes.
all I'm talking about is what's coming out of the well, because, I mean, are we testing anything coming out of a faucet?
The only thing we test for is,
No, I mean for radium, have we
Or-
tested somebody's faucet with the water softener currently with our HMO process in well 6? So we can't even characterize, I mean, I know where you're coming from, Barb, but
It's the
nobody
same
knows,
quality.
nobody knows what that is.
Once it's treated, it's the same quality. Just needs more treatment.
actually softening will reduce the radium a little bit more too.
I know we've talked about that.
So if,
But we,
if it
again,
was me and you and I don't have a softener, we might be getting better quality.
what's coming out of our faucets, the only way that we could test that is if we were willing to put well 7 online and just use well 7, turn the HMO system on, treat that water, and test it at somebody's faucet. In the meantime, we have the politics we have to deal with because we're running well 7. So I don't know how we can even talk about testing the water coming out of somebody's faucet, because nobody knows what they're drinking. They just hear radium levels coming out of a well. You heard, how many times we heard that?
Well, we do entrance point, which is technically the same water, raw water going into your house.
Except for how many times we talked about water softeners? A lot,
Yep, but my cold water does not go through a water softener.
right?
And the cold water is typically what people drink. So,
Well,
And
I
what's
mean,
your
and-
radium level in your cold water? You don't know. And I think that's the point he's making, is we don't know. You can't tell people that you're gonna have more radium in your water because we're using well 7 when we don't know what your radium level in your water is right now.
well, we know what the tests are. We've done all the testing on the entrance point into the system. And we know what those values are. We know what the treatable values of well 7 is. We know that with the green sand media, we had breakthroughs and there was issues, and that's something that Stockwell very specifically said, that without going to IMAR, there was significant risk that you would potentially exceed the EPA standards running well 7. And with the IMAR, the chances of that risk are very, very minimal. And we're finally going through the process of going to that. So, again, I can hear Kim saying her thing, and
I just
we're
asked if you
trying
had any
to,
input yet. I throw Kevin under the bus.
right?
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah. The big thing is it's redundancy. We need to get another well in the ground. That's why this committee said to move forward with the gamma log and the testing of well 8 is the redundancy. And if we don't have a plan for the missing capacity, if we shorten up the well, then we don't have redundancy. End of story. And I
But the
think-
only reason that I would say do number 1 is the fact that if we do number 3, we get that 32-hour whatever test back, and the levels are as high as 7, then we have 0 with the political problem, because we now have 2
But it's still
sevens.
treatable.
Well,
I
It's still
understand this, but that's the point, is then why didn't we just use 7 if it's treatable?
I've been saying that for 9 months.
But I'm telling you, that's what I don't want well 8 to turn into, is our next well 7, that we have a political nightmare and we can't even touch it. That's the only reason I would say not to do number 3, that's it.
7 isn't a backup because it can't produce enough water, correct?
About
It's
So,
about the same as what we're talking about.
If we short.
If we shorten it.
There's no guarantees on that either.
No.
I mean, if you went to shorter, kind of a crapshoot, maybe you only get 800,
Mhm.
900 gallons. a minute.
Right.
Kind of a crapshoot.
right, and that's, in the end, do we have enough information to make the decision? Number one, data-wise. Number two, are the individuals sitting at this desk skilled enough to make the decision? And there's a few engineers at this desk, but is it their cup of tea to make that decision? Should this fall on the engineering firm that did their work? Should it fall on an engineering firm that we have, sorry, I don't mean to point, but an engineering firm that we have doing additional water sources? I mean, should we be making this decision? That's the question I have, is, are we able to make that decision?
We said we would when we decided to go forth with well number 8 because of redundancy, didn't we?
We decided we would make these type of decisions when this committee was formed.
Yep.
I agree,
So,
I'm
yep.
just,
So, I mean, to say now that we're not called on to make decisions,
I'm,
after all of our time and effort, is diminishing what we have done so far.
I'm
We're not
just,
making the final, we're just suggesting.
We're just, yes, we're just making recommendations, we don't do
I'm just
anything.
gonna say that, we're suggesting what we think after listening and
Yes.
forming.
Correct.
And what we know, what we hear from the general public, we're gonna just say, hey, this is what we do, go to the city council, they decide what to do from there. And if they say, you know, I don't agree with what the council said, you know, or this and that, then- and the general public should be there to give their input and their thoughts, so that, it's representing everybody.
That's a good point.
We're just gonna make our best judgment, which that's all we can do.
Raleigh, in the end, if we get well 8 up and running, and we're, regardless of what we're running through 8, 6, blending it with 3 or 1, how do we test the water at the entry point without, how do we test the water from the treatment plant without putting it into the system?
Can't run it through the plant without putting it out to some.
So we go through the HMR system, we go through the IMAR system, we still can't test the water until it's going through the system, right?
In order to make it work through the IMAR, you have to send it through the IMAR.
Right.
In order to,
I guess my
Filter
point,
it,
what I'm
it's
trying to
gotta go
point
through.
out is that if we are, let's just say we keep it high enough in this gamma log that we end up with, what, 5, 6 picocuries per liter coming out of the well, something like that. You know, we have the IMAR and the HMO system, we're still running that. So what are we expecting for radium levels? 2-ish?
4 or less. Because I'm just thinking if you even got down to a 70% though, you could be at 4 instead of.
What you're gonna do when you, once you get your new building, is you're actually gonna just, you're gonna bring in 6, you're gonna bring water from 6, and water from 8, water from 6 or 7, and blend it, so that you're bringing in a small amount of radium, test the water, making sure you're keeping it within the standards. As you go through time, you'll just start increasing those wells that have higher levels of radium, so that you actually never exceed the radium levels. The intent is just to bring it in at a slow rate, blend it, as long as you know where your blend rates are, and we know that. We just actually test it as we go through time, making sure that we always stay below the
And we created a baseline of well 6 and the
That makes
IMAR, or
sense.
the HMO already.
Yeah, does that change at all if we go all the way to the bottom of well 8? Same
In
process.
my mind, well 8, well 6 are gonna be pretty close to similar to what you got. It's not far enough away to, I don't think you're gonna find geological stratospheres that are gonna change.
And especially when we bring in, 9, if that develops to the 400 gallons a minute, we're gonna take 9 is shallow. try, we can blend the new 8, so that we can bring just a ramped up amount of.
I have a fundamental issue making a decision to decrease our quantity based on quality numbers that we know are going to be below the EPA standard, based on money that we've already spent as a community to establish an HMO process, which is specifically designed to treat for radium, and we're gonna increase our filtration ability to increase quality by implementing an IMAR and getting rid of our green zinc.
And I have
It goes
a,
back to the political side of it. Thank you.
I have an issue with taking it all the way full depth when we very well know and have information showing us that the majority of the issues with radioactivity stops below 260. So that's, I mean, if,
But you don't know how much you're sacrificing in quantity. So
Yeah.
how are you gonna come up with that in the meantime? Cause well, 6 is gonna have to go offline for rehab, so we're gonna have to get the water from someplace.
The political side of, that you're
From-
coming from, Tim, is that we're gonna have to have eventually more quantity, right? So we're just
well,
gonna
as the town
spend-
grows, we're gonna have to have more quantity,
Right.
absolutely.
So that's the political side of that. Part of that is that we're just gonna have to spend more money to find more quantity. And that's okay, I'm
Yeah,
not saying
yeah,
your
right.
decision, or
The-
what, the way that you look at the radium level is from a political standpoint, that if we can reduce or increase the quality, just eventually, we're gonna have to come up with quantity, more quantity.
We will, and when we've been given information that specifically shows increased radioactivity, I have a really hard time stomaching the fact that we would knowingly put a screen in that area. That's my personal issue. I really struggle with saying don't go full depth, and because I don't have the known values of if we go to 260, what is the flow rate? I don't know that, and that's challenging for me. You know, we could very easily say move ahead with 1. If we get ourselves into trouble, a year from now we could drop a plug in and plug it off at 260, and we could do that a year from now once we have additional sources. I mean, there's nothing saying that we couldn't delay that $50,000 to plug off that part of the screen that is in the hot part. We could do that 3 years from now.
You're talking about doing the number 3.
So what I'm talking about doing is we could do number 1 now and the option add, and
Number
this.
2 now.
You'd have to do number 2 now, go all the way to 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
All the way
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
go all the way down.
Right.
And then in the future, it's not gonna cost us 50 grand. It might cost us 60 or 70 or whatever it is 3 to 4 years from now. But if we do run into quality issues and we have a known ability to bring in more quantity from 7 or 9 or whatever that is, we could plug that at that time. So I mean, there's nothing saying that we have to do the whole path to 3
No.
right now. We could start
Do we
off
have
going
to do
full
three-
depth.
I mean, do we have to, when they're drilling it, do they have to put that capability when they're drilling it?
No.
No, okay.
So 2 and 3 are technically the same thing. 3 just means that we didn't like what we saw in 2, so we're doing another test. That's
But
what
it
that
is no
money is. So
different up
we
front.
could just say number 2 if you wanna go to 280 and
Either one.
1 if you wanna go to 260.
And really, that's what we would have probably looked at doing with 7 if 7 had been screened higher.
Yes,
Right.
that's correct.
That's probably a pretty good compromise.
You know,
Is
so.
We can always do 2 and go backwards to 1. You can't do 1 and then
Do 2,
extend it to 2.
right,
I did not know that,
exactly.
or didn't understand it that way.
That's all good, but we're still coming back to the table with numbers of radium levels, and somebody is gonna have to make a decision on what is acceptable or not.
And that's-
So why would-
make that decision?
Well,
And it's all treatable when it comes out of the, you know, after it's treated, then it's within the EPA standards. It's just that when it comes out of the well, it's not.
As long as
And-
we
And that's-
understand at some point, we're gonna have to come back to the table again and make a decision
Yeah.
based on a radium level that is acceptable to the public.
To the public.
and that's, if I remember right, that was some of the discussion that was part of AE2S, and looking at additional water sources was to look at the potential to reduce that even further. If we brought in a rural provider or we did shallow aquifer wells, you can start blending and doing things that are going to reduce that radium level even further. And at that point, what we may do is we may say, okay, we've got enough quantity now to sustain and to even have some excess. We might make the decision in the future to drop the plug down that well. And I don't know if it's that simple as dropping a plug down the well, but that's what I think of it is you've got a straw with holes in the sides of it, and at a certain point you don't want to suck up the sand off the bottom of the glass, so you plug it. And basically the best way to put it is once you stop at 260, you're stopped. If you go to 280, then you can always shorten it back up to 260. So
really we're deciding between 1 and 2.
Right, and then
At
we
this
can
point.
execute 3, the option
If
add
we want to.
later, based on quality, quantity. Is there a potential that when we're doing this, we could do a temporary plug to 260 so that you could see what you could get
I don't know that
for
answer. I'd have to
flow?
check, but I mean, the problem with putting anything down there is getting it back.
Yeah.
Well, right,
I would think.
exactly. I just didn't know if there was a way to see what our flow rates would be at 260 cutoff. That's the piece of information that we can't do this pluses and minuses because we don't know how much we're going to lose. If we cut it at 260 and we get 600 gallons a minute, that sucks. That's really bad news. But if we cut it off at 260 and we get 1,200 gallons a minute, that probably was worth it. Maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But it's really hard to say because if we're saying 1,000, well, that's 30% you're losing in capacity. You're losing a third of your capacity by cutting 20 feet out of it. And is that really is that realistic for this situation where we lose 20 feet of screen and we lose 30% of capacity? I mean, I don't know. That's if that's the case, then but
Based on any of the information that we've had since this entire process started, do we have any water that is not treatable? Is any of the water that we've had so far been untreatable?
Everything we have is treatable, just depends on how much you want to
What?
treat it.
I think it's all treatable. That's my opinion.
The only reason why I bring that up is because you said untreatable, and I wanna clarify that I don't think anything that we've had to this point from radium levels, which is mostly what we've been talking about, is untreatable water.
I think the one thing that everybody, EPA standards, I believe we can get to within EPA standards.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been discussion with this committee is you want it tighter than that, or you want better standards than EPA. And so, if you want that, that's hard to get to. I just don't think you'll get
and
that without a
well,
different
7 now that we're doing the IMR,
Yeah.
the risk of not hitting the EPA standards is going to be much less.
Yeah.
Where in the past, when we were running our green sand, and it's very outdated green sand, and we thought we were going to get 80%, but the test showed closer to 40 or 50 or 60% removal.
After 20 years.
Right, but if we would have turned on the HMO system in well 7 100% with our existing green sand, you would not have had enough removal rate to take it out.
But it
So-
was never gonna be 100% well 7.
Well,
Correct.
if well 6 went offline, I mean, it would have been our backup.
They would still run
But we
3.
So-
still blended it with 1.
And 3.
So,
and
but
then
at any
pump
rate,
3 into the system.
now that we have the IMAR
Yeah, it's
moving
improvement.
forward, we're taking those bids
Mhm.
and all that process. And with blending, realistically 7 should be coming on at some point. And I don't have a problem saying that.
When was that IMAR supposed to be in Raleigh, earliest we were talking about?
March.
No, I mean like last year.
18 months ago.
Yeah.
When was it?
Yeah, it's been
It
over
would
a
have
year.
been probably, best case would have been probably December of last year.
Of last year, it would have been up and going.
Yeah, by the end of last year.
Yeah.
For
And now it'll be in March?
Well,
With what?
if we keep moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right, I mean, if we accept
Well,
the
that
data, it's a
is,
blah, blah.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, that one's,
It's a committee, it's a committee.
yeah, don't.
There's
that one's
nothing
going.
It's
really
our
that I
intent
want.
to move forward with that.
So we're 16 months
What
behind.
are we gonna do?
Well, I think based on the information, and per Kim's point, we are a recommending body that I recommend that we go with option 2. And then we always have the option to add the plug at a future date if we would so need to, but to Paul's point, if it's, and Kim's point, if we're redundant, we need the quality. Quantity, thank you.
Yep.
We need the quantity to replace number 6, so.
And that was the overriding purpose when we first started talking about well 8.
Yes.
Was redundancy
yes.
for well 6. And if we are not concerned about redundancy, then, okay, alternative 1 is fine. But
Mhm.
if redundancy is the number 1 issue, then I think going to full depth is what we need to do. And I agree with Paul, the issue of water quality is there are legal definitions as contained in the Safe Drinking Water Act, but there are also local opinions, and we're not there yet. But I don't know that we're gonna solve that, and we're gonna have that answer tonight.
No,
So, again, main issue with well 8 was it we need different quality, or we needed redundancy for well 6. I think it's redundancy. So we're trying to aim for that quantity of water that we're currently getting out of well 6, which is not all that far away.
is there any method in which we could construct a well that would be short at the 260 that could produce enough quantity? Bigger size well, I don't understand all that. Is there any way in which we could hit those quantity numbers if we didn't go full depth? Any way possible?
Probably not in this, at that depth, probably not. There's other well types and shallow aquifers that
Yep,
are successful. Just lateral wells.
Sure.
That you could get there.
That's what you were
but
talking about
I don't
earlier.
think we'll get there with this deeper well.
Right.
I don't know, I'd have to check to see if they can, if the technology can get back to it.
I don't wanna do any additional work, I'm just wondering,
You're just
our
thinking,
goal
can you
is.
Making a 36-inch diameter casing instead. and
Right.
making the same-
Yeah, I don't know how that works, I'm just asking the question
I
is
think it's
if we could.
a formation, not necessarily your
Right.
well control. I mean, well can definitely be a restriction, and making it bigger is probably not going to get you more capacity.
Perfect, thank you. That's what I was wondering is there any way for us to hit the quantity at the shallower depth? And the answer is no, from what I'm hearing. Okay,
So if we drop it down to the bottom, Tim, you stated that you have a real heartburn with that. So is this gonna be a case where the committee makes a recommendation, you're not gonna agree with it, and we're gonna have all of that again? I'm calling you on it, because I've seen it before. Are you gonna follow what the committee recommends?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
John, do you know how deep well 6 is in relationship to this 280 well?
It's about, I wanna say 12 or 14 feet deeper.
So more than likely, well 6 is screened through this portion
Yeah.
of the higher dam.
We think so.
But just, yeah, Raleigh thought about
Based on the
290,
information
so.
that we have.
I thought it was like at 290, roughly 294 around there.
So I was looking back at some old posts today just for the fun of it that I had actually taken screenshots of, and it's frustrating being a resident of Brandon, being involved with a lot of the work that's gone on in Brandon. The same people that were complaining that we had a breakdown on well 6, that we were potentially not gonna be able to irrigate our yards. We didn't have enough water to wash our cars in our driveways. It was quantity, 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 quantity. And this decision, if this comes out as a political issue, because now we're disregarding quality to some extent for the quantity, it's very frustrating to have us be sitting in this situation where we're a recommending board to the council, and that for all of us to be on the same page is super important, that we move forward as a group, that we have the same opinions, and that we agree to these kinds of things. Because we all know when it comes out on Facebook and people start the rants and the raves and whatever, that we don't go on and try to defend the decisions that we're making, because we spend all this time here talking about this, the good discussion that you talked about earlier, Tim. There was like 1,200 views, I think, the first water committee meeting we had, and now there's like 20. I'm not kidding. It drops off. I mean, I kind of even think sometimes, like, I hope that we still do have some sort of validity sitting here making these decisions. Because I'll be honest, I mean, I got, it's Tuesday night, 6:30, yeah, there's other things that I'd like to be doing too, but I truly think this is important, that we're making these decisions based on the future. I remember Don Wells saying it in one of the first meetings. We are here as a committee to make decisions, or to actually recommend to the council so that they can make decisions that is going to be a long-term benefit for the city of Brandon. And I hope that we're still doing that. I've thought about this a lot. I truly feel like the decisions that the Gamma Log, things that we've spent money on to try to make these decisions and then have options, and all the time that Stockwell spends on their effort, and Tammy and Brian and Raleigh and council, and we've spent an exorbitant amount of time and effort on this process and spent a lot of money on infrastructure that we are not using, and it for whatever reason, it always goes back to the politics. And that's, I think, to Barb's point, that we are a collective group making a collective decision, moving in the right direction. And I want to go home and sleep at night because we're making the right decision. It's important to the citizens of this community that we are making these educated decisions based on the best information that we have. And it's unfortunate that people go on Facebook and then bash council or staff or our engineer who's been doing work in this town forever. So it's disheartening. But moving forward, I do want us to recommend the right thing. And if we have this option to go back, if our radium levels prove that they're too high for the public to accept, then we spend another $50,000 on our water system and potentially reduce that radium level. But I know for a fact that our staff, people that have been working in this water system forever, and our administration and our engineer are going to make the right decisions with the HMO process that we have in place to treat our radium levels to an EPA acceptable standard.
Questions or concerns? So at this point, we will move forward with taking the well to full depth as the recommendation. It's the understanding that should we ever need to, we can shorten that up, like Paul said. At this point, the main goal is to build a redundant well to well 6. We do have additional information that helps us make those decisions with the Gamma Log that I think you said, Paul, that it was a good spend. It made a lot of sense to get that information because it helps us make these decisions. There is risk, and at this point, the collective decision of the committee is to take that risk and to go full depth, because we feel that the quantity is the goal for redundancy. So If there is someone else that would like to make this recommendation to the council, I have no problem with that. I'm happy to make that recommendation, and move forward with it, and go from there.
Do we wanna vote just for the record?
We can vote, yep. So, talking about cutting it short and that part of it for me, the word politics got brought up a lot, and it's frustrating me a little bit because it gets brought up so much, but the Gamalog shows what it shows. It shows it's there. And
So we know
the
where to
easy
go
way
before we
out
plug it.
for quality is to cut short.
But that's how but that Gamalog
Right.
tells us that we can do that later.
That's correct. So, in my brain, what I go through when I try to justify something that I don't 100% agree with, I look for the options to make change in the future if required. Okay, so do I 100% agree with going to 280 right away and that's the end game? Honestly, no, I don't.
That was one, just real quick, cause that's the thing, when and how does us as the general public know, I mean, where is somebody, like with your testing, Raleigh, I mean, once we do it, we get up and running, and that testing, like, what's the time frame that we're gonna say, okay, I can see this is increasing, I guess I just wanna know that if I vote on something like that, that it is, somebody's gonna be doing that testing, that I'm gonna know.
Well, it's a
roughly to the
32-hour
general
test, right?
public. Like, if I vote today, you know,
That's
2
not
years
what we're
from
talking
now,
about.
when will I get anything out?
We're talking about what Kim is asking, correct me if I'm wrong, but Raleigh's testing for radium levels. Those radium levels have to be below the EPA standard. At what point can we not treat the water to an EPA standard?
Well,
Or
just
an
something out to the
acceptable
general
level?
public, I think it'd just be nice to have something out to the general public, cause we're gonna go all the way down, they're gonna hear that, you know, that just we go back, you know, we just reiterate back to them that says something out there that says, okay, this is where we're at on year 2, on this particular well that was of concern, you know, I guess, you know what I'm trying to say?
It would be
It's
great
just-
to have a congratulations, we've successfully implemented well 8. Here is the results from the testing, everything's good to go. And during that process of going from, I forget the terms right off the top of my head, but when you bring a well online, the state will finally give you your permit that says you can produce it. Part of that is the testing. So we'll have a clean bill of health before we would ever bring that well into producing water into our treatment plant that makes it to your faucet. So if this comes up and it is water that has a significant risk that it can't be treated, well, we're gonna know about that way before it would ever get to the water in the homes. I mean, realistically, right?
Well,
I
that's
mean,
when we would say, okay, let's cap it at 260 and do another test, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you know, so
How often are you testing for radium levels at the entry point?
every,
Do it every 6 years, required by the state. You get a waiver, and if you're below the certain level, then you have to only do it every 6 years, I think it is.
3.
I think, or 3 years, yeah, 3 years. But like Brian and I were just talking, if there's a change to what we're doing in the water system, as I stated before, we created a baseline with green sand and HMO. So if we're gonna go to well 8 and we're gonna change the filter media, we're gonna do another baseline. We have to start, so we've got a baseline.
Right, cause you've gotta know what your dosing is and all
I gotta
that,
know-
and
yeah,
that's,
I gotta know, okay, just treat well 8, this is what it is. I already know what it was for well 6 with green sand, so I'm thinking it should be fairly comparable, maybe use a little less. And in the end, when we go to, say for instance, bring well 7 up, we're gonna have to have that baseline to be able to know what's in this water, and we'll test it. We can test every month, like a $200 test. We can test it every month if we wanted to. But we've always been below the EPA limits, so the state gives us a waiver and says, hasn't changed, your water hasn't changed, so you don't have
Right.
to.
What does that test cost? What does it cost?
$200, something like that.
I just think it'd be nice to, I mean, I hate to spend money, but I think that it would be nice if we do it. You know, we're making, you know, suggestions, that would just be something I would be suggesting is, you know, we're just kinda doing something that's a little, you know,
Increase the frequency of the testing.
yeah, or, well, just increase it, that for this particular, you know, thing that we're gonna do, because it's kind of, everybody's all up in a roar, just give it a, you know, like a, hey, attaboy, we did good, you know, I don't know, something.
One of the
Yeah, the
reasons we don't
communication.
test it monthly though, you don't get the test results back for
Right.
3 months.
Hopefully a month.
Yeah.
The reason
It
is-
took almost 8 months to get the results back.
But that's a cyclical thing that we're doing. If you're taking a test and it takes a month or 2 months to get the results, then you're taking another test a month later, and at some point, it's just a cyclical.
Yeah, and
result.
it's just a,
Back every month.
yeah,
And I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that it's just a suggestion idea out there that I think we have to, you know, we're kind of worried about the politics, we're worried about the people, their thoughts, I mean, it's just another way to kind of warm the hearts and make them feel like.
build confidence.
Yeah.
I think that was something that
It's all part of the
I remember
education.
in a dialogue with AE2S talking about the water study. Part of it was building confidence, you know, and, you know, overdoing the communication is a key piece of this. And, you know, it's, personally, if we went to 280 and there was no way to go back to 260, I'd be making a bigger stink about it. Knowing that there's the potential to go to 260 later, it eases my nerves. Is that the best way to put it? I mean, if we need
Can't
to.
go from 260 to 280. if you
Right,
make the decision to
exactly.
go the
So
opposite.
that's,
Right, yeah.
we can't go the opposite. So
Exactly.
that's where, let's go to 280, let's
Right.
get it done. If something happens, we've got a backup plan. We've got a way out. And, you know, that's what I'm looking for, is what's our exit strategy if it goes south? And in this case, we have that. It's pretty easy.
Which is
And
based
it's-
on the test results that we continue.
Well, we're gonna have to go through a 32-hour test. We're gonna know where we're sitting at.
Yep.
Right, I'm saying
So-
at what point, just as long as we have this potential decision that we can make, it's gonna be made on certain criteria that's gonna be based on more testing that we're gonna do, and if it
Right.
comes back that the levels aren't acceptable, then we plug it.
Right,
Yep.
exactly. And that's in the future. It could never happen.
Which
We
are
don't know.
more than likely still below the EPA standard.
Right.
I mean, no, I mean, they are going to be below the EPA standard, it's just a matter of how far below the EPA standard we want.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, option number 2, go full depth to 280 on the screen. Is there any other discussion? Cause I'd like to get home. Okay. All in favor of option 2, I'm not gonna do a roll call, I'm gonna do like the mayor does now, that works really well. If there's any disagreements, we will do a roll call individual. So, all in favor of option 2, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Seeing none, we will recommend option number 2, full depth. Any other concerns? We will adjourn.
Do we have a next meeting date? Are we gonna meeting next month, or?
I will push out an email as soon as I have an update from AE2S. At this point, we don't have potential incoming, anything from AE2S, so I'll get with Brian and we'll figure out when the next deliverable is from them.
I just wanted to write it down.